and got the maps to the stars of Hollywood homes. He and his friend, Joe Campbell, who isn't in the business, and found where Ricky Nelson's, well, I should say Ozzie and Harriet's home, where the home was, where the kids were raised, and went by, rapped on the door. The maid came to the door, and he said he wanted to see Ricky. And she said, well, he wasn't home right now, that he was at the studio, and he would be back until about, let's say, 4 in the afternoon sometime. And so he said to the lady, may I just sit here and wait for him? She said, well, all right, go ahead. And so they sat there and they waited for him, and when he came up, they introduced themselves, and John had his guitar with him, no case, just the guitar, and played Waitin In School for him.
Right there in the driveway.
Right, well, on the front porch. And he liked him, and he played a few more things, and he talked, and he said, give me your phone number, and I'll have someone get in touch with you. We lived probably at that time when the freeways weren't so crowded, in Compton, which was about 10, 20 miles from Hollywood, from where they lived, and they came home. When they got home, the phone rang, and it was someone from Imperial Records calling, and the next day Mr. Chudd called, and they went up the next day.
Okay. Why Ricky? Why did Johnny go after Ricky specifically?
He'd grown up with him, you know. He's a little bit older than Rick. Probably, 10 years, and we'd seen the kid grow up. And he'd started, he'd sung something on television by then, if I recall. Did he do a Fats Domino thing first?
Probably I'm Walking, yeah.
Yeah.
It was probably that show that...
And I'm not sure when that was done.
That's 56.
And so this is 57, so Ricky had started making his noise. And he had, and of course, Rick had the pure rockabilly sound about him. And this is, of course, what John and Dorsey were into. I don't think they realized they were into what they've called rockabilly today.
What were John and Dorsey doing? I mean, were they just writers, or were they performing, or what were they doing at the time?
Well, they had finished. They had appeared on the Ted Mack Original Amateur Hour and had won 3 times in a row, and gone on that tour with the Ted. Well, I've forgotten now what they called it in those days. You know, they had sort of a tour after. If you won, you went. A bunch of you went on tour.
Yeah.
And got a taste of the business. But before that, you know, they'd always played in clubs around Memphis, around town, where they pass a hat and they collect what they'd make for the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And so they went over there. They made some noise. Of course, they had the Coral Record album out. They'd had that album out.
Okay.
The Rock and Roll Trio.
Okay, so they were into performing and writing songs, and they decided to get
Dorsey came to Hollywood first.
Uh-huh.
This was, you know, hey, every kid dreamt of that.
Mm-hmm.
Come to Hollywood. This is the land of milk and honey, right?
Yeah. And
Dorsey had come first, and then gone home, and then we came out and joined him in 57. 57. And then they got the deal with Ricky. And then we went back to Tennessee and came back 6 months later in 58, stayed for good.
Yeah, what were your first impressions of Rick when you met him? He was like probably 17. Yeah, 1957, he was 17. What did you think of him?
Everybody thought the same thing. John, Dorsey, all of us thought the same thing. He just got the most beautiful blue eyes I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it looked like he was looking through you. They were absolutely the most gorgeous blue eyes. He's very quiet, you know, and Ozzie kind of ran the show.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, you know, we didn't, socialize. John Dorsey went into town just about every day, and every day they wrote a new song for Ricky, I'm sure, and sent a lot of songs to Chud. I forgot now what their deal was, how many they were to get into. They signed a writing deal with Imperial.
Yeah.
And I've forgotten how many. You know, they usually have so many for a month or whatever it was, and I've forgotten. So everything they wrote, they concentrated strictly on Ricky.
Oh, so it was pretty exclusive for Ricky.
Well, the system's different then than it is today.
Yeah.
And they had this going for them. Well, why not keep it up, you know?
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that...
Even if somebody else had called and said, gee, you wrote such a good song for Ricky, how about giving us something? I think what they did was the best always went to Ricky. From then on, everything, the best always was for Ricky. Even to do stuff for themselves. If they had something good, it would go to Ricky.
Now, did you start to socialize with him after John and Dorsey started writing for him? Did you associate with the family?
No, I didn't. No, my sister-in-law did somewhat. I did not. I stayed at home. I had a different attitude about the entertainment business. I had 2 small kids. I stayed at home.
Mm-hmm. What did John and Dorsey think about Rick? Did they ever talk about the way Rick works and his professional attitude and such?
Very professional. Of course, he'd done it all. You know, he'd been behind cameras and doing stuff all his life, so it was like John and Dorsey were like kids in a candy store. Even though they'd done an album in New York and had been on the Ted Make, they'd had a taste of this. They were still, everything was like, they were always, stayed bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for a long, long time.
Do you remember when John and Dorsey wrote Believe What You Say? Can you tell me anything about that song and how it came about or exactly what was involved in that song?
You know, that's always been the amazing thing to me with them and with anybody, I suppose, that can write songs for that matter. Somebody would say something, and they could sit down and say, this is a good lick, this is a good sentence, and then they'd start singing and humming, and next thing you know, the words would start coming. They were very prolific. Whatever was published by anybody, whatever they published themselves or as announcements, in between that was probably 20 other songs.
Mm-hmm. Well, Believe What You Say turned out to be one of the more significant hits for Rick, and you know, as I indicated to you yesterday when we talked, he recorded 4 separate versions of that. He recorded that song more than any song that he had ever done. I mean, Traveling Man, I think got 2 recordings. Mary Lou got 3, but Believe What You Say showed up all during his career, and it's really credited with being one of the outstanding rock and roll rockabilly songs of that era. I mean, was that the indication at the time when that song came out that it was indeed a classic song? I mean, how did Dorsey and John feel after the song came out and that public response to it and everything? Did they sort of sense that they had a classic song in their hands?
You know, isn't it funny? I think when you're writing them, you certainly don't think like that. No, nobody thought it. You didn't think in terms of that. Mm-hmm. We had 2 small children. Dorsey and Alberta had 3 at the time. And it's like a lot of it you're working to feed your face. You're making a living. And you starve a lot. So it was just hard times. You sit down and you can write. Yeah. I think it comes out. I'm not saying that a person that's lived on a satin cushion all their lives can't write beautiful material. I don't mean to say that, but I think sometimes if you had a rough road to hoe, you tend to write some songs with some gut feeling in them anyway. Yeah. I don't think they felt like they were writing anything that would last forever and ever. I think you always hope that it will, but I don't think you sit there and say, now I'm going to write a classic. It just doesn't come that way. The
relationship between Rick and Johnny obviously was probably lucrative for, well, not only Johnny but Dorsey as well, seeing as how a lot of Rick's hits were written by either both or one of them. And did that relationship, that writing relationship, continue when Rick left Imperial in '63 and went to Decca? Did they continue to write for Rick, or? I
think, well, of course, John only lived another year after that. He died in '64, and I don't think he ever sat down that he didn't write and have something in the back of his mind for Ricky. Because any time they went there, the door was open. They would go to after they got to know him, then they would go to the studio because they were making the TV show. And they were like, they could get into the studio whenever they wanted to. And they would go to the sessions when Rick would record, especially their songs, of course, and I guess just about every session he did were doing something of theirs. Yeah. And Rick was kind of a perfectionist, and perhaps I should say Ozzie. He'd do it over and over if it wasn't just what he wanted. He knew what he wanted, even then.
Yeah. Now, how long did Dorsey live? When did he die?
I'm afraid you're going to ask me that. Dorsey was 48 when he died. He would have been 49 that year that he died. He was born in 32.
Oh, so we're talking about 70, 80 something.
So it's just been recently. I'm at 48.
I wondered if he continued to see
That's
Rick.
6 years ago. 6 years ago.
Yeah, did he continue to see Rick during that time, or after Rick moved on to other things, did there come sort of a parting of the ways?
I don't think there was ever a parting of the ways.
So they remained friends throughout. I want to ask you a few things. Did you see Rick after Johnny passed on?
No.
Okay. You never saw him in later life then?
Not person to person, no.
Do you have a sense of what Rick's contribution to music was?
Well, of course, I'm very prejudiced in his favor. I just feel that he was, I hate to use the word underrated. You can correct me. There's probably a better word. But Elvis was always so much out in the front, whereas Ricky's stuff may last longer. God, Elvis fans will kill me for that, won't they? Perhaps I shouldn't be saying that.
That's all right. That's all right. You've repeated what a lot of people have said.
I just felt that, I mean, he was this little kid, this little charming little boy. I mean, even when he was 17, even when he was 30, he looked like a little boy. When he died, he still looked like a little boy. This endearing little boy with this voice, and he did it his way. I mean, he didn't change. He could have gone on and done a million other things other ways, but he didn't. He stuck with that same feeling that he had in the very beginning. And he's going to be around. His music's going to be around for a long time.
And when did you go to work for Glen?
Went to work for him in 1975.
Okay. Did you ever have a chance? I mean, was he aware that that you were Johnny Burnette's wife, and that you had connections back to those days when he used to play rhythm guitar for Rick?
Who, Glen?
Yeah.
Well, I knew Glen when he first came to California before he even got started. He and my husband were friends.
Oh, really? Okay. So
John and Dorsey had seen him in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They'd been on tour for one reason and another, separately and together, and had gone to the Hitch and Pulse and seen Glen. And like everybody that had gone down through there had heard of Glen. I mean, because he had quite a little name down there in that club he played, a local name. And the thing was, what are you doing here? Why don't you come to California? You'll never get anywhere in Albuquerque. You've got to come to California, boy. You're too good to be here. And ultimately he did. He and his wife, Billy, at the time, packed up what they had and came out here.
So in other words, they knew each other, and
There's a whole bunch of people that kind of run around together that had just sort of arrived around the same time.
Yeah,
John and Dorsey, Jimmy Bowen, Glen Campbell, Jerry Fuller.
Now, what was the connection to Rick with all these people? I mean, was that John and Dorsey that kind of brought them into this whole thing?
Well, John found him as first. I hate to say first, but he's the one that went up there and said, "This is what we have." And Ricky liked him, and that was it. Now, how Jerry Fuller got to him, I would assume that everybody could have gone to Imperial Records anyway.
Yeah.
It was difficult going to the record companies. They had done that. John and Dorsey had been here, and they'd beat the pavements because you go everywhere.
They made the rounds.
Made the rounds, and I mean, it's going on today. Everybody makes the rounds.
Yeah.
And they just had it enough, and this dear friend of John's, Joe, who still lives here in California, said, why don't we go find the person? The person. That's who you got to get to, the person. This going through somebody else is for the birds.
So they end up on Rick's front porch.
So they end up on Rick's front porch.
And then they bring in a guy that plays guitar named Glen Campbell.
Well, they didn't really bring him in. He just kind of came, and you didn't bring anybody in. Everybody was just kind of there. Everybody hung out in the same places. Everybody talked like it is today. This one's playing on that one's session. That one's playing on this one's session.
Yeah. Now, did Glen talk about what it was like to play for Rick Nelson? I mean, hopefully we can get Glenn to talk about that, in person if he becomes available. But did he ever give you an indication?
No, I never
what it was
discussed it with him because it was just sort of something that was kind of matter of fact when it's going on. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I'm playing the Rick Nelson session.
This is my session today, or we went by and saw Rick today, but he was doing such and such a show. I mean, it was just kind of like you kind of take it for granted, as we all do,
Yeah, yeah.
When it's happening, it's just going on. You don't think about, oh boy, this is fabulous, because everything isn't Academy Award night.
Yeah.
In between that, it's a lot of people and a lot of hard work.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last question, and this is from your personal perspective now. How would you like the world to remember Rick Nelson?
The way I remember him.
Which is?
With warmth and kindness, tenderness. He was just a wonderful, gentle kind of a person.
Okay, that's got it. Hey, I want to thank you.
Well, I thank you for asking me.
Yeah, this is going to be a neat little segue into some things. Like I said, as I told you, I want to spotlight Believe What You Say, because I think it is a real significant recording in Rick's life. It kept coming back and back. He did it in the original in '57, did it again in '72.
I needed to say something else too.
Yeah.
I don't know if other people have mentioned this or not. The entertainment business, probably back then, was the days of payola and all that business was going on, and a lot of shysters are out there. I suppose that's any business, but back then, quite often you could do something and you'd have to go beat on doors for your money. You'd have to fight for, hey, I've got royalties coming. Well, I'm busy. There was always a story, except with the Nelson family. They were very, very famous for paying on time. Ozzie was a very honest, meticulous kind of a family, and royalties came almost to the day, the same time all the time, and we always got a royalty check.
I understand.
Around Christmas time, just before Christmas time, so that I don't know about the other families, but I can speak for the Burnette families, and between us, Alberta had 7 kids and I had 2. There's 9 kids. And there was 9 kids from they weren't all there in 1957, but that always had a Christmas. Never, Santa Claus always came because of the Nelson family check coming in. The number of checks, because some of the songs went into different publishing companies, and they always paid meticulously. They have paid to this day. I never missed getting a check after John died. They were wonderfully honest people. You don't always find that.
Yeah. I understand that Ozzie was, he always portrayed himself because he wrote, head writer, director, producer of the Ozzie and Harriet show. He portrayed himself as sort of this confused, bumbling sort of guy, but I understand that he was a genius IQ and also one of the sharpest businessmen in Hollywood.
He was very, very sharp man. Very wonderful man.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm glad you added that part because I think that's really important. I really, want to get a sense over of not only what Rick was about musically, but what he was about personally, obviously. And I think a lot of that ties into the family. I mean, certainly I found it with David. Just a wonderful, warm man.
You weren't out. You didn't go to the funeral. You weren't here.
No. I wasn't that close to Rick, unfortunately. I didn't find out really until I started doing this special.
I see.
How easy it was for a fan to have the kind of relationship that they wanted with Rick. Because I've met people, just fans, that would see him every time he came in town and would spend 15, 20 minutes, a half hour in the dressing room afterwards talking with Rick. Mm-hmm. And Rick sitting down and saying, how you been, and all the rest.
Remembering their names and the whole business.
And David told me, he said, he pointed out, I didn't even bring this up, but he said, I think what he enjoyed the most is when he would run into fans, and there was a handful of fans that no matter where he went. There they were. There they were.
The diehards.
And he used to remember.
I think every person has that. I have those for Glenn. I mean, they even call on the phone.
Yeah.
What's he doing right? Where is he right this minute? You know, that sort of thing. There, gosh, I thought of something else to say, too. See, after you get to talking, you remember things. Oh, I brought up the funeral. That was an insight into the family that was very wonderful to see. All 4 of his children got up and spoke about their dad.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like there wasn't a dry eye in the house, but they didn't shed a tear. They were troopers, just troopers. You can tell they'd been in the business for years, and the wonderful, wonderful things they said about their father. It's an incredible family.
Yeah,
Ozzie on down.
I'm certainly getting that sense. As I understand it, the performing background of the Nelsons goes back, I guess, into the early 1800s.
But see, I didn't know that about the family. Of course, I knew Harriet and Ozzie were entertainers,
Yeah.
you know, back before we even think of them on television.
Yeah, as I understand it, both sides. People were in vaudeville, were in legit theater, also in, I think, there was some classical music background or operatic background on one of the sides, and it all came down, and it, you know, like you said, it's certainly continuing on to this day with Tracy and Matthew and Gunnar are all performing. So it's nice to see that. You know, I of course focus on Rick, but I think that the whole story of the Nelson lineage would certainly make a fascinating book to see
What a
how
wonderful
that all
book,
traces
eh?
down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody ought to sit down and write it. I think I will.
That's a good job for you this week.
Thanks very much, Thurley.
All right, thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.